Anyone ever know that one guy in school who was just way too ambitious for his own good? Like, everyone knew that he was trying too hard in life, and you all figured he probably wouldn't be as successful as he was posturing, but, he was likable, so everyone let him be. Yeah, that's this handheld. It doesn't want to be an Anbernic or Retroid or Miyu. No, this guy wants to be more, like Satan, who exalted himself above God in heaven. I think this little guy might be too big for his britches, but let's slow down. Today, I'm looking at the Jelly Mini 5 MT. It's also called the E5 handheld, Retro E5, or Game MT E5. And as with most rebadged AliExpress products, it goes by a lot of names. Though, as William Shakespeare once wrote, what's in a name? That which we call a handheld by any other name would be as cheap. A truly great poet, and one who had a point. As consumers in the ultra bargain bin cheapo handheld market, we're not starved for choice. There's a lot of different devices you can go with, so why should you even consider this one? Well, let's find out. So, the device rundown. The basics are, well, basic. Starting with the display. It's a 5-inch IPS panel with simultaneously okay saturation and some washed out colors. Truly a marvel in display technology. There's a 215 ppi and the viewing angles are okay, not amazing, but not offensively awful either. For the battery, you get a 6,000 mAh capacity, which is nice. The device also supports fast charging at 17 watts. You can get a full charge in approximately about 42 minutes. The E5 also supports reverse charging, so you can power up other devices, but again, only at 17 watts. So this probably won't be fast enough for charging your modern smartphone, but it's a nice little marquee feature. Also, the joystick. It's a Hall effect one, so drift-free with electromagnetic precision, although it doesn't feel amazing to actually use. It's a switch-styled one, so it's small, stubby, and it has no L3 click. I'm not a fan of that. Now, the processor powering this device is an interesting one. If the quirky marketing slides are to be believed, then this processor is custom silicon? Okay, some special and bespoke ARM chip that Game MT developed just for this device? That's, well, exciting if true, and a huge reason I even decided to purchase this thing. But after doing some buyer's remorse field research, I learned that this chip is not custom at all. Wow, color me surprised. But it still seemed no one knew exactly where or what this chipset was. I saw a few great ideas, and this YouTube thread here seemed like the best possible explanation. At any rate, I plan to disassemble this device and take a look at the chip myself. There are remarks of the CPU labels being sanded off, so I want to confirm if that's true or not. But before that, let's talk about the device's ergonomics. Whoever designed this handheld had a vision. I'm not sure if it was a good one, but they certainly had one. This device has so much character beyond what one would expect for a $30 handheld. The interesting colorways, the boxy form factor, it all gives off McDonald's toy vibes. It looks uniquely amateurish, and it feels even more so in the hands. The plastic used is adequate. It's sufficiently sanded down, and it's finished well, so you don't feel any weird textures or abrasions when holding the device. I know some cheap handhelds like to really use 3D prints for their cases, and this is not one of those devices. The buttons feel off though. There's this slight grippy texture to them. It's difficult to explain because lots of buttons are textured, but whatever the one they used here is just weird. It seems to catch and rub across your fingers when they're dry. I really don't like it. If you've ever taken a wet rag and dragged it across a surface until it dried, then you'll know exactly how this feels. That greater friction achieved as the rag dries up is the exact sensation your fingers will feel on these buttons. It's not awful or a deal breaker, it's just weird. The button placement is also weird too. I mean, I'm saying weird a lot, but it just is. The device is so wide, but I still feel cramped for some reason. Now, I'm no Russ from Retro Game Cores, but I believe the problem lies with how close the D-pad is to the face buttons. Or rather, not so much the distance, but how aggressive the offset is. With the D-pad down in the corner like that, I feel my thumb exerting more effort to make the same button presses that another device would make. Also, The D-pad placement means your fingers have to rest awkwardly towards the bottom of the device, kind of like this. I've held a lot of flat rectangular handhelds before, but this one is definitely the strangest one. It simultaneously feels too wide and too short at the same time. It's like a hodgepodge of different design sensibilities. Wow, which is also like the software and game experience. Yeah, let's talk about the meat of the system now. What's gaming like on this thing? As I said before, someone had a vision when designing this handheld. I don't feel like the out-of-box experience was approved by a marketing committee. We're in someone else's world now, and it shows as soon as the device boots into the OS. We're greeted by hot purple and neon interface with a surprisingly jaunty tune playing. All in all, pretty good presentation. I know it's very cheap looking and it gives off knockoff vibes, but I have to say this all feels really earnest. They could have just done the absolute bare minimum and called it a day. But it seems like someone on the design side really cared. The OS has a lot of nice touches that I appreciate, like having a search function built directly in for finding the games you want. You can also favorite games and build your own collection. That all probably sounds simple, but you cannot underestimate the cruft a cheap AliExpress handheld will cut. I've had more expensive devices that didn't show album art for games or organize different games by console category. So I now take what I can get at this price point. And what we do get is quite a bit, honestly. Out of the box, you get support for 12 emulators: Neo Geo, MAME, all the Game Boys, NES, Super Nintendo, PS1, and some random arcade stuff. A pretty interesting spread, but a smart one. I can confidently tell you that most of the games I tested worked great on this handheld. Performance is on lock, everything is full speed, but you still have some of the usual emulation foibles. More on that later. For now, let's look at Super Mario Bros. 3 on NES real quickly. A staple of this game is its unstable nature on the fringes of the screen. This was because the game is capable of scrolling on both axes in the same frame. It's set up to have its off-screen buffer for vertical scrolling, but not for horizontal scrolling. That's why you can see all this artifacting here. This is actually a marker of good emulation, so the fact that this chipset is getting it right is a super good sign. It's also a similar story for Super Nintendo games. They just all work correctly, nothing really to report. I use F-Zero as a good benchmark for Super Nintendo performance, lots of Mode 7 shenanigans going on there. Sprites all scale correctly, and the speed is just as fluent as it should be. There's a lot of arcade games on this machine. In fact, too many if I'm being honest. Now, I like arcade games, don't get me wrong, but man, this feels like filler. They're all so similar. Quick, can you spot the difference between King of Fighters 2002 and 2003? Now, they all work as they should. Everything is full speed and accurate, which is nice. And I'm under the impression that this device was made partially with arcade games in mind. The joystick, the weird circular D-pad, and widescreen all scream try-hard Olympics. I don't know why you'd want to play all these hyper-competitive fighting games on a device like this. The joystick is small and a bit on the soft with rotations. Then the D-pad is just a slippery smooth piece of plastic. I mean, I'm sure some super casual games are alright, but trying to get lab time in something like Samurai Showdown? Forget about it. As a change of pace, almost all of Game Boy runs great. Game Boy DMG and Game Boy Color games run like a dream. But not GBA though, and this is where it gets weird. It runs full speed, but once again, there's audio issues. It's like a repeat of the Miu A30. Feels like the audio buffer falling out of sync with the emulation core. Listen to the intro of Wario Land 4 normally, and then listen to a bit of it on this device.
I know and unity.
Hear that stuttering and skipping? That's gross. Why is this an issue? We've been able to emulate GBA games for over 15 years now. And here in Yoshi's Island, listen to the world map theme. You hear that? Yeah! Seems like they added some extra beats since the last time I heard this song. This is how you get gaming depression. You buy AliExpress handhelds to relive your childhood, then get blasted with terrible audio. I have no idea how Game Boy Advance gets messed up here. This is not a hardware issue at all. It's for sure software. Now I may hear you asking, but Fox, how can you be so sure it's not a hardware limitation? Well, my dear viewer, look no further than PS1 performance. It's perfect. And the irony is, this was the console I was worried the most about. PS1 is extremely hit or miss depending on the retro device. The Miyu A30 I recently reviewed had awful PS1 emulation, and that had more CPU cores and years of development for its GPU. But no! Expectations subverted. The E5 has surprisingly great PS1 performance. Everything I tested works just as it's supposed to. I played a ton of Ridge Racer, Type 4, Driver, Dino Crisis, FF9, it all works. I am genuinely shocked. Usually PS1 is a throwaway choice on cheap handhelds in an attempt to sell people on the device's power. But here, it really does work 100% well. I don't get it. How did this happen? How do you fail to emulate Game Boy Advance correctly, but knock PS1 out of the park? The sheer incompetence to accomplish that is almost impressive. Did no one check this beforehand? I didn't see any reviews mention this, so I almost feel crazy, like it's just my unit, but I honestly can't feel that way. I'm gonna be honest and say I don't think other people caught on to this one. A lot of GBA games already have compressed and crunchy audio, so I think you could chalk it up to just the speakers sounding bad. But as I demonstrated, if you're familiar with the music, you can notice that, and it sounds so awful. I'm not expecting Harman levels of audio quality, but the source material should be playing correctly. I can live with bad speakers, but my actual game audio being completely broken? Oh no, we have a problem then. So let's take my frustrations out on the disassembly of this unit. I'm not expecting much, but maybe we can identify the chipset and see if there's been any kind of community work done for it. This section is going to be quicker than normal because there's not a ton to really talk about. The device is super easy to disassemble, only 4 Phillips head screws, which I'm not complaining about, I love it. All you have to do is unclip 2 speakers and a battery, then you're going to see this flashing status light on the board, but that's alright. There are a few board screws to unfasten before you can get to the other side, but other than that, there's not much here. And I do like how there's no clips though. I will always praise the device for not using stupid plastic clips. But what I really wanted to talk about were the 3 most important chips on the board, starting with the SoC. It's the VT569B. I was only able to find this snippet from Bootleg Handheld Wiki about it. The long short of it is that VR Technology was founded in 2001 in Taiwan. They specialized in affordable game console IC design. The company has been quiet since 2009 with no updates on their website, but recent budget handhelds with chipsets like the VT568 and VT569 have been cropping up. So VR Technology might still be making game hardware today. That's kinda neat. Then there's also the IP5356 chip, which is an integrated charging IC. This handles all the USB-C power delivery shenanigans that this unit can do. And if you go back to my Miyu A30 Teardown, you'll see that there are no IC chips this robust or with any capacitors or regulators like this. So that device most certainly had a static power draw issue. The last chip is the Puya P25Q64H. It's a 64 megabit or 8 megabyte ROM chip that has a pretty cool function. It holds virtually no data, so it's designed to copy small amounts of code from external flash and then execute what it needs to in its own memory before sending it all back over to the external flash. That's the reason that this device doesn't work if the SD card isn't plugged in. The SD card houses the OS and all of its functions. The ROM chip here is just for if any specific actions need to be done in its ultra-fast memory, like a sort of smart cache. And well, that's it for the disassembly. Not a ton to report, but an interesting device nonetheless. And this brings us to a close. Yet I still feel unfulfilled because I don't know how to summate this. Honestly, how did this device happen? What was the story? Who was the team behind it? Like I have said several times now, this device was somebody's passion project. That much is clear. This is not a paint-by-numbers handheld. Nothing feels phoned in. Yet, in spite of all that, would I recommend this one? Honestly, yes, if it's under 30 bucks. Despite the audio issues on Game Boy Advance, I have to concede that this product is compelling when priced accordingly. At this price range, you're up against other devices like the A30, so you really need to start weighing your options. This doesn't support as many emulators as the A30 or other contemporaries does, but it runs significantly better. The better performance cannot be understated at this price point. The team took a solid chipset and did their best to build a decent product around it. There are glaring shortcomings, but in this never-waning sea of so-so and outright garbage handhelds, those quirks and flaws help it to actually stand out. If you catch it on sale, or you buy it as a gift or an oddity for your shelf, it's not actually that bad of a time or purchase at all. But that's it for me. Until next time, everyone. Ciao.